Okay, the first thing for mixing the milliput, it's a two-part chemical process, and when you mix the two parts together, it reacts, and you need way less than you think you do. So I recommend starting with a size of about the size of a lentil. And it's better to make more repeatedly than to have it harden and you have to throw it away. And these look very, very similar. So what I do is I bring both parts over together, but then I put the one I just used away so I don't forget which one I've used, because it's real hard to tell. And if you don't have equal amounts of the different kinds, it doesn't harden. It doesn't do what it needs to do. So you want to really make sure you've got the same amount of both. It's really critical, because if you don't have equal amounts, either it won't harden at all, or you'll get lumps of really, really hard stuff and really soft stuff, and that's no good either. So I still think this one's a little bit too big. Now, when you mix this, make sure that you mix it more than you think you need to. It's not going to harden for at least an hour, 2 or 3 hours. So you can't mix this too much. And what I like to do is roll it out into a snake and then coil it up and roll it out again and just keep doing that. And you want to do it for at least a couple minutes. And what I would recommend is do it more than you think you need to, and then do it some more even after that. Okay, so now I'm finished kneading it, and I've got that well mixed, and you can see the white residue on my hands, and that's kind of sticky. So we want to make sure the clay sticks to the project, not to us. So I just take a real, just a moist towel and just wipe that off. And then I don't want my hands wet, because the stuff will stick to me instead of the project. So then I take a dry towel and I make sure my hands are dry. And then we can start making curlicues. Okay, the first one we're going to start with here for an example is this curlicue right here. And I like working on separate pieces. Instead of sculpting all of this area, say at once, I like doing one curlicue at a time, because it seems like the tool bashes into the other things you've done, and it actually is more efficient to do it like this, for me. But you'll all find your own way. That piece has, a concavity like this one does. So I just make a little snake, and it doesn't really matter how accurate it is, because you'll see you're going to be really mushing it down with your fingers. And then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the board around, because I'm going to show you how I'm going to anchor the back of it. So I'm going to take just little nibbles of it, and I'm going to hook it down onto the plywood. Now, the way this design is, there's a ridge that goes down the middle. So what happens on this inside really doesn't matter, because it's going to get covered up, ultimately. So, and I'm saving all the pieces I cut off. I'm saving on a saucer, because they're usable, and I will continue to use those. And as I said, this stuff takes a couple hours to completely solidify. So you have some time, and you'll notice that when you first mix it, it's continually getting stiffer as you go. So when you first mix it up, it's the most sticky, the softest. And then as you work, it it tends to give you a little bit more resistance, and I think that sometimes is a little more easy. It's a little easier to work with, and you can see you can push it, you can direct it, and they recommend that you moisten your tools so that the clay doesn't stick to the tool. So I have water here, but you can see there's hardly any water in here. It's about a quarter of an inch of water. And that way, when I stick my tool in there, I'm not completely drenching the tool. If the tool gets too drenched, the clay gets so wet, it gets so soft, it's just really, really hard to work. So, okay, so that's sufficiently anchored on this side, and I'm going to turn the board around because I'm going to work on the part that's going to show. So you can see I've got a little bit of the plywood that's exposed there, so I'm just going to kind of herd some of that over. And then I want to start making those concavities, and this tool is real good for that because of the shape that it is. So I can just grab some, and okay, and I want to work this part around. Now on the other end of that tool, it's a pointed end, and what's nice about that is you can really feel the edge of the plywood. And if this were just a drawing, you wouldn't be able to make it symmetrical because you couldn't really see what you were doing. So what's nice about having the plywood is I'm pushing the tool up against the edge of it, and that way I can tell what the limits of this particular little piece are going to be. And it looks rough now, but don't worry about that, because as you're working this, there's different things you can do at different parts of the process. Right now it's kind of soft, but after about an hour, you've gone on to work on another piece, and you can go back to this one and you can smooth off some of the irregularities in the tool marks. And the more you can do before it hardens up, the less sanding and filing you have to do later. So I highly recommend that you try to do, have it be as neat a job as you possibly can in the process that you're working. Another thing you can do is I want to differentiate between the height of this one and the height of that one. So I can take I can take my X-Acto knife and I can actually slice some of this off. Okay, so I can slice some of that off. Now, another thing that is real important to do as you're working is you want to change the direction of the light. It tells you a lot more of what's going on than just having the light in one particular direction, because you are making shadows. So you want to move this thing around and actually look at it and you see what's happening, because there might be things you can't see just from one direction. Another thing I want to show you here is defining the edge of this little curly Q. You don't want everything to just look like a half round. So I can take this part and I can kind of herd it down, and I can get a different shape. You can see this one, you can start developing a curly Q like that. And not only by digging it out, but by curling it over. Oops, sorry. Like that. And you start getting a more interesting and defined line, and they shouldn't all be exactly the same. And as it gets harder, you'll be able to do more of that. So I'm gonna, you can see the tool's kind of got some stuff on there, so I'm gonna wipe it off with the damp cloth. Because the cleaner the tool is, the easier it is to manipulate. Okay, now I'm happy with the roughing in of this one. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move to a totally other area of the carving. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to continue on working on this leaf that I just started to rough in, and it stiffened up a little bit, so I have a little different control over this one than I do over the one that I just roughed in. Okay, what I want to show you is now that I have this thing pretty modeled, this is when it gets really fun, because this is like drawing. You can actually alter the line. So if you wanted to make this coved over this way, you could do it. You can move it back the other way. If you want to continue the line of this curve, this is when you can start doing things like that. You could open this up and make it more curved. You can smush this thing back down. You can kind of steer it, and actually, like you're drawing with a pencil, you can start defining your shadows, and then this is what you do all that other work for, to get to this point, to decide. So some of them you might have a sharp edge like this. Some of them might be more rounded like that guy. You have all sorts of decisions you can make, and it's pretty much just whatever looks good to you. You can kind of flatten out the top of that guy like that. And the smoother you get it now, the less you have to do later if you want to clean that up. But that, I just wanted to show you that. And then what I would recommend highly is, because you're going to be so focused on the next thing you're doing, is I tend to go and work on a completely different area. So the next thing I'm going to work on right now is this guy right here. And I'm only going to do this one, because if I try to do more than that one, I will bash into it and I'll smush it. So you get this thing all beautiful the way you just think it should be, and then if you drag your hand across it, you're going to be really sad. So I just keep working in a different area, so I'm not, this hand is the one that causes the trouble, because you're not paying any attention to the way you're holding something and you drag your hand across this beautiful thing you worked real hard to be wonderful. So this one will be my next area, and you can see I have on my, this is all the little stuff I cut off, and this is all perfectly usable. This will be usable for about an hour. After a while, you'll feel, oh, this is getting so stiff, it just doesn't want to stick down. So you'll know, you'll get to this point where all of a sudden it's really, really hard to do, and it's because the chemical process has gone far enough that this is no longer usable. But we're not nearly there yet. You'll have plenty of practice by the time this is done. Okay, that's one more down, plenty to go.